Hi, Susan. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I, you're welcome. I've been so excited for this conversation. I've been thinking about what I'd most like to talk with you about, and I don't really know where to start. It's basically me asking you, hey, can you tell me the story of your life and lessons learned? So we could spend
Oof.
hours talking. But to start, we've only met over the past few months, but I've been a fan of your work for years and years. And I'd love to delve into, I know you've led user experience teams at many different companies. So I'd love to delve into your experiences at MindBody, Toast, Workiva, all of your experiences. But to start, what I love to do with the leaders I'm talking to is just hear a little bit about now as you reflect back on your career to date, what your lessons learned have been. So I'd love to start, Susan, just for some background. Could you share a little bit of the story of your life and career and what's
Oof.
gotten you to this point?
Yeah. But before I do that, I have to say right back at you, we've known each kind of each other for so many years, like for many years. And I admired your work as well and your career and everything. So I just wanted to say that
Thank
before
you.
I say
Thank
anything else.
you.
So,
I
yeah.
appreciate that, Susan.
Yeah. So my journey has been long. You've been in the UX field for a long time, so have I. So I started back in the day when I was waitressing through high school and college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do after college, so I just continued to waitress, and then eventually just was getting bored, and so I was talking to some of my other server friends, and they're like, "You're creative. You should look into that thing called web design," and I'm like, "Huh." Yeah, I'll check it out. And I did. And I went through a graphic and web design program, an intensive, and I just fell in love. I just loved it. It was so fun and all this work on the computer to be able to do these like visualizations, and it was really great. So that really launched me into UI design first,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually I worked at some different startups, and I worked at one where we hired some external consultants and they taught us about usability testing. So I was like, what is that? That is so awesome. Because the idea is you're putting out these designs, you don't know how they perform, you're not sure if they're actually resonating. And the idea that we could actually learn before we actually develop anything, that was really a pivotal moment in my career, because that's what made me go out and search for the Bentley program in the end. So I took the human factors course for 2 days, loved it so much that I decided to invest in going back to school for my graduate degree at Bentley, and continued working in parallel with going to get my graduate degree. That was a lot there.
Yeah.
it was it was busy times. But I worked at a bunch of different small startups, and then eventually wanted to learn from a team and established, UX team. So that's why I joined Staples. They had a team of 20 something UX professionals, researchers, designers, and I really wanted to learn from them and be able to figure out like, oh, okay, just feel more confident in
Mm-hmm.
what I was doing and how I was approaching the work. So I was there and I worked on a lot of different types of work. It was really fun. You do everything from circulars to what like you don't even talk about that anymore, but circulars in a newspaper to
I know what you're talking about, Susan.
yeah, thank you. I know. So these people are like, what's a circular? It's the insert you put inside a newspaper for ads. But yeah, furniture instructions and of course the .com, but that was just one part of a bigger multitude of different types of projects. I was a manager, just a couple of people, but I didn't do a great job at that. I felt really
Okay.
uncomfortable with it, and I just didn't like it. And so when Vistaprint came calling, I wasn't actively looking for a new job, but I wasn't satisfied with what I was doing. I'd been at Staples for a couple of years, 2.5 years or something. And like I said, I wasn't comfortable with being a manager. I was like, oh, go back to being an IC. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'll do that. Yeah. And the thing was our users were designers. So I'm like, oh, I get to work with designers and help them be more efficient and more successful in the roles. It just was so compelling. So I joined the Vistaprint team, and eventually, just because there were opportunities on the this was internal tools, but eventually the .com, when the consumer facing had some opportunities, and I was like, I'll help out for now, and then you could backfill and what have you. But I enjoyed it so much because I learned about multivariate testing, and so it was different than my .com days in Staples. This way we could learn about how our designs were performing in a different way. Mm-hmm. So literally based on revenue, you can see AOV, average order value, can go up so significantly, $200,000, and you learn that in a few weeks. It was really exciting. So I continued to do that, and then eventually organically built a team there. But the big difference that I'll say is that Vistaprint was so fantastic with how they invested in their people. So a significant amount of investment in everything from an HR perspective, the people, and career ladders, and clarity around roles, responsibilities, clarity around expectations, and then this really great 1-year management and leadership program. That was huge. And what I'll say is, I don't think that there's any coincidence that a lot of people from Vistaprint have become very successful. So yeah, I don't think that's a coincidence.
You can see sometimes I'm looking, and I know we're not even to the current days for you, but I have some questions just to start here. It's so fascinating to me. So when you talked about, Susan, your first management experience, you were like, this is not for me. I'm going back to the IC role. Yet then once you're at Vistaprint, when you're getting support, you mentioned that you were building a team. At around that point, were you starting to think, okay, this management thing may be right for me? Was it the support you were getting there, or what led you to shift back and know that management might be the right fit?
Yeah, so a number of things. I had really good models for that at Vistaprint. Like I said, they had a really established HR function, people's function. And so there were a lot more tools and tactics that were applied. And then also, again, like I said, the investment in that program, which was huge. What I learned during that time was that I wasn't necessarily expected to just wake up one morning and be a great manager. I thought they were born. I thought great managers and leaders were born. I just did. I didn't know any better at the time. And then by learning that there are all these tools that you could leverage, or these strategies that you can employ, that was, again, another pivotal moment in my career where I was like, oh, mind blown. All these assumptions I had were wrong. And I actually can learn how to do this. And again, it was really through that experience at Vistaprint that enabled me to see that. And then again, go into that program. That program was so fantastic. We learned so many different aspects. It was cohort based and topical based. And we spent 4 weeks alone on, or 4 sessions, which were multiple weeks, actually more like 8 weeks, but just on coaching individuals. Yeah. So it was great. It was really so helpful for my career.
And why Vistaprint sounds like it had an amazing culture, helped you become the manager you wanted to be. What happened? Why did you move on, and where did you go next?
Yeah, so I'd been there for 6 years, and there was always this kind of pull back to California, which is where I'm from. We had young kids. My sister had young kids, all about the same age, really, like the oldest are 2 weeks apart. The idea of being closer to them, to be able to bring the cousins, raise the cousins together, just felt really compelling. That's when I started looking at opportunities in California, and I stumbled upon that opportunity at MINDBODY, which was so great because vertical SaaS for health, beauty, and wellness. I've always been very much into health, working out, staying fit. And so I just felt like it was a really great fit. And so when they made the offer, I was like, yeah, let's go do this. The interesting thing part, it wasn't super close to where my sister lived, but it was, still within the realm of a few hours. But yeah, it was a great opportunity at MINDBODY because I built the team there were about 9 research designers. And then I had the front-end engineers too. For 2.5 years, I had the front-end engineers. Eventually they folded into the engineering department, but it was great to have this team of different individuals that we were solving problems together. And then I continued to build out that team, and we made such a great impact. Research was so well received there. The insights that we gleaned were so well received. We had the CEO on stage in front of the whole company saying, hey, you know what? This research saved us at least $1 million because we didn't do something. Mm-hmm. We did, like, it was a don't do this thing. Here's the reasons why. Mm-hmm. So we didn't go into the hardware business at that time. And so it was a really, really impactful.
It's funny talking about, you and I spoke about this offline, this period when you moved on to MindBody. It feels to me, I get to see through your career a path in life not led, because at the time I remember that opportunity being available. I was managing teams and UX teams, and I took the shift to go external. And I've seen the 15 years, I've seen the path you took. By no means saying that would have been my path, but it's fascinating to hear about your path and the lessons learned, because that's where I think our career trajectories split off a little bit. So yeah, I love hearing the stories of from MindBody on, like, where did that path take you?
Yeah, from MindBody on, it was the interesting part. I hinted at the location. Mm-hmm. We ultimately, as a family, didn't end up loving that location of San Luis Obispo, Pismo Beach. It sounds crazy because if you're aware of it, it's beautiful. I know. People are like, what? You didn't love wine country and the beach? Like, why wouldn't you love that? It was just not quite for all of us. And it got a little bit, it's called slow for a reason. San Luis Obispo, slow. And people, you love it or it's not for you. And so we found out it was just just didn't work for us as a family. And so at that point, then MindBody was the only tech company in that area, basically. So I knew that at that point, either we had to move, mostly we had to move because remote was not a big thing like it is now. So there weren't that many remote opportunities. And I ended up getting this, Toast came a calling, and went to my family and said, what do you think about moving back to Boston? And half of them said, we never wanted to leave.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then one has been bitter about leaving the whole time. But yeah, we're still working on that. But yeah, so that's when I went to Toast, and that's vertical SaaS software for the restaurant industry. And so that was in 2018 is when we moved back. And that was like, oof, talk about a whirlwind. Hustle culture, you are moving fast. And people will say, oh, this is a really fast moving company. Let's talk about fast. Fast it's in the eye of the beholder, I'll say. The velocity is really in the eye of the beholder. And I will say, given all the different experiences I've had, and I've worked at different companies that were moving fast, but Toast is moving fast. Let me give you an example. So I joined the team, again, 9. I don't know what this number 9 is, but I had 9 direct reports, all reporting directly into me. The first, maybe not the first leader, but I was the UX leader there. And then I grew the team to 50 in a year and a half. So obviously I had to hire a management team because I didn't have a layer, but I couldn't do that right away because we had so many initiatives and so many needs in different areas. So I ended up having something like 12 direct reports before I could then feel like I could spend a little time on hiring then that management and that leadership level. Okay. Built all of that kind of system out. And just MindBody, I didn't mention this, but MindBody and Toast were similar in that they didn't have a lot of the HR strength at that time. The GA functions typically are less invested in startups, whether they're early stage, or in the case of MindBody is more like mid-late stage. You just don't spend as much in HR functions, for instance, or in accounting and all of the back office type of stuff. So I had to build all of that from scratch. Okay. The competencies, the ladders, the skills, how we measure and set expectations, and the review processes. There was no review process at MindBody. Previously, people had to pitch that they're ready for a promotion or something at any given time. You really need to build a system of being equitable across the team. And so a lot of that all the operations essentially needed to be built across both of those roles.
I've never told you, Susan, and it's so fascinating for you to talk about how you went from a team of 9. You mentioned team of 9 to 50 and growing and scaling UX teams. I don't believe I've told you before, but when I've been talking with UX leaders, many of them have had teams of 10, 12, 15, and are now moving into positions where they're asked to do what you did, grow and scale a team much beyond that. And
Yeah.
several UX leaders have said, when I've been saying, who's the go-to to talk to about this? You've come up so many times as the person to talk to, because I have to tell you, many UX leaders will say behind the scenes a little bit, they feel lost at that point in their career, going from understanding how to be a manager of a team and sometimes even being a manager of managers with a team of 15. But the lost aspect is, you mentioned there's so much operations work. Have you put together sort of a roadmap and game plan for UX leaders where if they come to you, you can say, okay, here's the first 2 things to think about when you're growing and scaling? Because a lot of these leaders don't know what to do. And I'm curious what your advice for them would be in terms of where to start when they're asked to grow and scale out a team.
Yeah. I think that's a brilliant idea, by the way. I'm like, no, I have not done that.
Next
But it's like,
path.
I know. I'm like,
There's
well,
a
that
demand.
sounds good. Yeah. So what I'll say is I've presented about this, for instance, at the UXPA New Hampshire monthly meeting. I presented about scaling in high growth orgs. I have presentation materials, and I have essentially that would be what you could break down and then be able to say, here are some different areas that you could be focused on. But every company and every situation is different. So I don't think it's going to be something that you're like, okay, start with A, B, C. It's not going to go in that order, because sometimes a company might have A already, but they don't have, or they might not have A, but they have C and D, or whatever that looks like. Whatever that ground floor is that you're joining is going to be different across the different orgs, and what they care about is going to be different across orgs. So you need to assess and take the time to be able to assess and figure out like where's the real like fire burning, and where are the things that like, okay, there's something here, I know I need to address this, but I've got time because this fire needs to be put out. So, that's why I don't think there's a special order of things, but there's certainly like a foundational element that you could work towards over time.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, you're at Toast.
Yeah.
And then you make the leap over to Workiva. What was happening, and what was your charter and mandate there?
Yeah. By the way, the leap was an intention. That was restaurants completely failed during the pandemic. And having grown so fast as an organization, I think we grew from 1,300 to 2,500 in a year, the company. Then we just hit a brick wall with the pandemic. So that was not by choice. I had to lay off half my team and then say goodbye myself. So that was devastating, to be honest. But then had time to be able to like, okay, recover and recoup. And I took my time. I really decided not to go right away into anything new. I had a really great job opportunity right in front of me right away, which I think made me feel even more confident that I could take my time, to be honest. But I knew I was not ready emotionally, because that was just a lot. And I was exhausted by the speed in which we're operating. So I really took my time. How I found Workiva was actually a previous manager on my team from a previous role. He was actually speaking with them, and then they decided to up-level the role or something along those lines, and it became a VP role. And I know exactly who you need to speak with. And he reached out to me and said, hey, did you see this role? And I was like, yeah, I saw it. He's like, you should talk to them. I've been talking to them. That's really great. And I'm like, I don't know about reporting. I'm not sure about that. Financial reporting. I can't even do my own finances.
I understand that.
Right. And he's like, no, you really need to talk to them. So he convinced me to have the conversation with the hiring manager there, who is now the CTO. But so once I had that conversation, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I really like what they're saying here and what the opportunity is. And So eventually, obviously, I joined the team, which was great. There was a team of 30 with a light management team, not a ton given the size of the org there. And they were looking to grow. And I joined them November 2020. So we were in the middle of the pandemic. I didn't meet anyone in person until the next year. But it was a fortunate situation that Workiva did particularly well during the pandemic and continues to see growth. We were able to hire during a time where a lot of people were scrambling and trying to figure things out. So that was really great. Then we had the great resignation. There was just a lot of movement. But at the end, I left the team at the end of May, and I think we're at like over 60 UXers, and that was research design and content design, in great hands with a really established leadership team, fantastic leadership team over there. And then I just decided to take a break. I was starting to go through college tours with my son, who's now a senior, and I freaked out a little bit, to be honest, because I've been the breadwinner and I've been spending a lot of time on my career to be able to be successful and stuff. And so going on these college tours, I was like, oh my God, I don't think I've spent enough time with my family. And he's going to be gone soon, and everything's going to change. So yeah, so that was the impetus for saying, you know what, I think the team is in a great place. We got what we needed from an OKR perspective. We're working on these frictionless experiences. We've all of this influence and great trajectory, and home is a calling. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of this. There's so much I want to unpack and ask you about.
And if I'm like going way too long-winded, please stop me.
Not. There were a couple of things that you shared that a lot of things you shared that will be valuable to the audience. But when you were talking about moving on and making the transition from Toast, with your expertise and your reputation and just your background, you mentioned at this period the devastation involved in terms of having to lay off your team and you moving on. Can you speak to that, like how you manage that time? The reason I'm asking you, Susan, is it's a really messy time. I don't know if you've noticed in the tech world and UX world. And I've been having so many conversations with product and UX leaders who are feeling that devastation and fear and trying to figure out what's next. And I'm curious, when you've gone through these periods that can be really hard, you were managing it by taking a step back, but do you have any other advice and recommendations for people during this time, whether they have been laid off or they're worried about it? What would you say?
Yeah, it's going to be different for everyone. The reason why I'm saying that in particular is because I was fortunate enough that I had the funds to be able to feel comfortable. Now that's going to be really different than somebody else that might not have put away enough to be able to feel comfortable with not working for a period of time. That's like a huge night and day difference. I was fortunate that I didn't have to worry about financially. I didn't have to worry about us. Obviously, eventually there would be that case, but I knew I had a good amount of time where I could recoup and not have to feel frantic right out of the gate, which was fortunate because it's like it takes an emotional toll on you for sure. I've been laid off twice in my career, and neither time did I feel good. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, the first one was the .com burst. It wasn't like nothing you can do about that. And it was early career, and I never worked harder in my life than looking for a role after that, getting myself ready because I hadn't expected it, and just hustling with getting my portfolio ready, making sure my resume looked good, having lots of conversations, looking and applying and all those things during a time where there were not a lot of jobs because of the .com burst. But I feel like, looking back, that was probably, I think I worked the hardest during that period of time. So what I would recommend is, if you have the opportunity financially to be able to just take a breath and take a beat, just take a moment.
Mhm.
Please do, because you'll show up better if you're in a good emotional state. If meditation is your thing, I used to hate the notion of meditation, and I don't do meditation the same way I think most people do. I use it as like a tool. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm ruminating. I'm going to listen to something for 10 minutes. I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes. I'm going to present. I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes before I present. I use it as like a tool, not as a practice. So if there's something like that that can help you center, I think that's great. Network for sure. Reach out to your network, have the conversations with different people. It might feel awkward, especially if you haven't spoken to somebody in a long time, but that's just what networking is. And then I filled my time with a lot of mentorship. So after I was horizontal for a while from the layoff at Toast, I eventually came out of that and I said, okay, so what am I going to do with my time? Obviously, I'm going to be interviewing and looking for a new role eventually. But when I wasn't quite ready for that, I did I think ADP list at the time. I'm not really on there anymore, but I did 70 mentorship calls and conversations during that period of time. So I wanted to make sure I gave back to others, and also then it's also really fulfilling for me, and it kept me in that kind of headspace, I would say. So that was really a great way for me to do that. When I've been taking this break now, I've not just been focusing on my family. There's still a lot of time left besides that. Well, I traveled a lot. We traveled a lot. I went to Korea for 3 weeks with my sisters. That was amazing. In between all of that, I've been volunteering. So I spent a lot of hours volunteering within my community. Again, a way to give back and feel good and lift my own soul up in that way and get myself ready for, okay, when I'm ready for the next thing, I'm going to feel good about that I've given back in the meantime. So I think, what are the things that are going to make you feel good? And also, what can you do to set yourself up for opening up the funnel, like the opportunities, which that to me is, you're looking online, of course, but you're having those networking conversations and reaching out to other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. And I'm wondering, during this period, it's now December, and you said your kiddo, not a kiddo anymore, but is moving off to college. And I'm describing it, you're heading into empty nester mode. And I'm wondering, you're volunteering, you're figuring out what's next, you're spending a lot of time with your family. But I wonder, when you're thinking about your next chapter with your kiddo about to leave the nest, where are your priorities right now? Like, how are you feeling about this period?
Yeah, I have a second. So she's a sophomore. Yeah. So I got her for a few more years.
Not an empty nest yet.
Yeah. Not an empty nest yet. And also I want to be able to be here for when he wants to come back and visit and what have you. So no, I'm not there yet where I'm thinking about the empty nester situation. I'm more thinking about, okay, what does it look like for the next X amount of years to make sure that I'm setting both up myself up for success and from a retirement perspective, and also have everything that we need as a family. So I've been interviewing. I'm back to that. I'm ready, and I'm feeling like, okay, we're in a good place. We got my son through a lot of like, there was some Eagle Scout project, whatever. He's Eagle Scouted now, so that's good. I feel really good about that. And we're going through the application and what have you process now so that he can figure out where he's going to college. So we're almost there. And the rest will be hopefully coasting down through senior year, I hope, because he's just it's just been interesting. Anyways, some of the grades are still really worrisome, but we'll see.
But you are having some time to reflect. And I've been asking leaders like you who have had a long, impressive career. One question I'm really fascinated to ask you would be, through your career in tech and UX, your top lessons learned, specifically, like if you were to go back when you first found this design area and, usability testing, this is fascinating. If you could go back to yourself at that time and share your one or two biggest lessons learned, what would you share with yourself? That's a hard one.
Yeah, back in the day, my biggest lessons learned. There's some lessons that I learned along the way for sure. Our early career that I'm like, oh yeah, why'd I have to learn the hard way, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
And then it's actually interesting because I'm thinking about this for my son too.
Mhm.
And one of those things is like, you can learn from anyone. So one of my bosses at Vistaprint, I had a few because I've been there for 6 years, moving things around. One of them, he was my boss. Then they had somebody else become my boss, and they'd never overseen the UX team or anything UX. And I was, quite frankly, I was just like, oh my gosh, now another person, another manager that's not ever managed UX. My previous boss just said to me, he's, listen, you can learn from anyone.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay. I don't know if
Not
I took
buying it.
that fully in. I didn't really fully understand what he meant. But I did, by the way, reach out to him about 6 months ago and thanked him for that. Because eventually I did understand it, and eventually I did internalize that and apply that to my life. Is, yeah, you know what? You got to remember, you can learn from anyone. So if the sooner you can learn that, I feel like the more you can learn,
Yeah.
the more you can be open to learning, the more you can be better at your role because you've learned something. So yeah, so that was actually an interesting lesson.
It's
Yeah.
also, you spoke to this. I've been talking with other folks who asked me, who were your role models along the way and who were your mentors? You spoke to something that you went back to a role model, a mentor, and you thanked him for the advice. And that's something that I've been sharing as I've grown in my career, taking that time and space to go back and thank the people that helped you along the way. When you talk about networking and connection, like that's a big part
Yeah.
of it too, where it's not this uncomfortable feeling. I'm curious your take, if you are now, as you've grown in your career, setting the intention to thank those who helped you.
Yeah. That's funny that you mentioned that because only a few weeks ago I reached out to my old boss at MindBody,
Mhm.
and I was like, I was just thinking about how great an experience we all had together
Mhm.
and thanked him for being open to all of that. Yeah. One of the best moments I feel like in one of the best moments that I remember in my career, there's lots of moments, but
Yeah.
was when he said, oh my gosh, it was about the research and the insights that we were bringing toward forward to help us inform the product strategy. So he's like, I wish I'd known this so much sooner. I
Mhm.
wish I'd known about essentially this way of gaining insights to inform product strategy. Yeah, it just felt really great. But he was open to all of that. And then he was open to being able to use and leverage that to make a change. It was a really great time. So I just thanked him for that.
Nice. I
Yeah.
joke there's a lot of thank yous that I'll have when I go on my tour, but there's
Yeah.
also the apologies where it's like, oh, I just
True.
didn't get it back in the day. And you were talking
Yeah.
about it took you with your mentor, like you got a message, you were like, okay. But over time, as we grow, hopefully we can also go back and say, oh, I get it a little bit more now. And that's also really fun too.
Yeah.
Even when you haven't always gotten along perfectly with someone, even just going back and saying, wow, I figured some things out. I find that people appreciate that as well.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and why not go back and be able to do that and make that connection really obvious?
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah.
There was a part of your story where it's coming up quite a bit, where I think there's so many problems you can solve for UX folks. But one of the periods that I'm hearing is a really challenging, pivotal period for UXers is that shift from IC to management, that first
Hmm.
time. And you spoke about your first time where you were starting to think, oh, this isn't for me. I hear that from many folks who make that transition. And you also spoke to once you got the management skills and training you needed, it shifted your perspective. And I wonder, making that leap from IC to management, what did you not get that first time around that would have been super, super valuable? I know there were frameworks
Yeah.
and skills, but if unfortunately many first time managers don't have that culture of training and support, where would you suggest they start?
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, you would be able to try it on a little bit
Yeah.
before you actually take the management role. And by that, what we typically try to do is give people more opportunities for mentoring others. So while that's not exactly the same thing, at least it's taking some part of the role and letting you try that on and giving you that support. When we say mentorship, we're not just like, oh, go mentor somebody, you're done. There needs to be a little bit more support, knowing that might be the first time that they're mentoring somebody else. And so helping them understand, what does that look like? What does good look like? What is the kind of contract or expectations for being a mentor? And then being able to have the conversations about, okay, how are things going? What's working? What's not working? Where do you have questions? So to me, that's all priming you for being able to then like at least have one part of the management role understanding that part. So ideally you would have that. I didn't have any of that because I just got hired into the management role, and then I didn't have you know what I mean? And then if you don't have that kind of setup, and at the time Staples didn't really have anything that kind of helped you with frameworks and models and things like that. Yeah, so I didn't really know that there was something at the time that I could even go out and research and learn, which is interesting because I do that all the time. Like if I don't know something, I immediately go Google it. I'm just like, okay, how might I make oxtail soup? I'm making oxtail soup right now. Do I Google it once? No, I have 5 recipes. I'm like, okay, so they do it this way, they do it this way, okay. And then I just try to figure out how I'm going to blend that into my version of it. Like you can do that with your career too. So I'm not sure why I didn't do that at the time at Staples, to be honest. It's interesting because I do that with everything else. But yeah, maybe I just wasn't ready for that. But that's something else I would recommend is go read about management. Read some of these like books and stuff. Talk to other managers and help ask them like, what is management for you? How do you break that down? Just do the research, I would say.
It's so funny you're talking about that shift for you into management. And I had that shift as well, where I landed and I did not know what I was really doing. And I made the shift that management wasn't right for me, just like you did during that first experience. There's something about mindset that you're touching upon. Like when you're making a soup, you do research, you're looking to learn and grow. I don't know what it is. I don't know if I have an explanation, but I'm hearing consistently from people who move into management that they have a tough go at the beginning and their mindset tells them, oh, this isn't for me. Whereas with other job roles and responsibilities, they do what you say. Oh, I don't know everything that's involved in this role. I'll do the research. And I don't quite know how to explain that there's this shift that, nope, management isn't right for me. I'm curious, do you have any take on why people might make that leap quickly?
Somebody, I'm like, who was I just speaking with? I was just talking to somebody and they were like, oh, I think it sounds like you did the same thing I did. Put leaders on a pedestal, like managers and leaders on a pedestal. And then again, like maybe assume that it was just you're born with it somewhere along the line. I just assume that. So if my assumption, my baseline understanding is you're born with it, and then I go try it and I'm not doing that well, then it's not for me. So once I learned that it was actually lots of it learned skills, then I was like, oh, well, wait a second. I know how to learn. That's different. That's different. So I think that for me was the difference is, okay, you're not born with it. Some people, by the way, I will say there's some people who are natural born leaders. I will just say that. And I think that they are more empathetic naturally than I am. Or there's just certain things about maybe their personalities, whatever that is. But to truly be great at this, and you do have to research, you do have to learn, you do need to experiment. And a lot of it is tactics and strategies.
Yeah. I just got out of a conversation yesterday where we were talking about a few UX leaders. Jen McGinn was one of them, Diana DeMarco Brown, mutual connections of ours, and Melissa Pell from the product world. And we were talking about the difference between a manager and a leader, and that a leader could potentially be someone who is not a people manager. You were speaking to UX leadership, and you've been both a leader and a manager, but I wanted to ask you, Susan, like, how do you think of leadership? What does leadership mean to you, specifically from a UX leadership standpoint?
Yeah. So I agree. I don't think you have to be a manager to be a leader. Absolutely. You can demonstrate that you're a leader. I think it's like certain behaviors and certain roles that you're taking on, like mentorship, overseeing a part of the practice, that sort of thing. So, as an example, at Workiva, I had my own direct reports, directors, and some senior managers, but I also had some principal designers.
Yeah.
And they were part of what I call the UX leadership team. So just because they weren't managers doesn't mean they weren't part of my meeting, essentially. I kept it flat intentionally, meaning even though a director might have a manager, they all were invited, including the principals, all to my staff meeting, essentially. So that, because I believe that knowledge is power, and that most things I should be able to be transparent about. Now, are there going to be certain things where I'm going to go off and just talk to maybe my heads of each of the disciplines? Yes, there were times where we're going to do that. But for the most part, high majority, 90% plus, it was information that I could share across the leadership team. And a lot of times I would do that asynchronously, and then we'd have the time to be able to follow up with questions and what have you. And so we did a little bit of both. But yeah, no, I absolutely do believe that individual contributors can and should be leaders.
You spoke to, thank you, Susan. I wanted to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I do not want to lead the witness. I'll try to be an objective researcher. But it really struck me when you were describing your time at MINDBODY that the senior leadership was promoting to the organization that the insights were transforming the strategy. I think you mentioned the leaders were saying, oh, we saved $1 million here by not doing something. And I have some thoughts in terms of when insights really drive change in an organization. Okay, I will lead the witness a little bit. I'd love to get your take, because you've had so many diverse perspectives and experiences around research. I wrote a post where I was sharing with researchers who can be really hard on themselves. And one of the challenges researchers have is you want to get the organization exposed to the customers and users, and they're doing a lot to rally the organization. But sometimes the insights don't lead to all of the change they'd like to make. And I'll hear researchers saying, rightfully thinking about what they could have done differently. But I've also said, I see there being a lot of power when you have someone in the C-suite that really values insights already. Having that evangelist and champion can really help matters. It doesn't mean we can't do things from the bottoms up, but it really helps to have that evangelist at the top. And I'm curious, at MindBody and other organizations, do you think that's an essential component for teams to tie insights to strategy, is having someone near the top who's supporting the work and understands the value? I'm curious your take.
Yeah. Obviously, that would be ideal, right? That would be ideal. That there is a champion at the highest level, and they're helping pave the way for bringing those insights and actioning, being able to action on those.
Always happen.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. But then it's like in some ways too simplified to say, oh, that's it. If we don't have that, then we're not driving value or bringing value to the org.
We're out of here.
Yeah. Because that's
nuance. Yeah.
It's so nuanced, because you could still be, for instance, influencing the product strategy or the product roadmap, but a C-suite has no idea about that because they're not as involved in that level of detail. Or maybe they're aware of it and they're like, great, okay, but they're not necessarily the one championing it. It's just what's proposed, and it's just like, okay, this is what we're doing. Here's the why. Okay, great, moving on. So that's where I'm like, it depends on the organization, how they function. You could be absolutely influencing. And again, like I said, not having that champion at the C-suite banging the drum. So I think it varies depending on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering, to the degree you feel comfortable sharing with me and with everyone, you are looking for what the next role might be for you. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, you said, rightfully, you can take the time to find what's the right fit for you in your next leadership role. When
Yeah.
you're coming into a company and assessing what might be the right fit, where you think
Yeah.
you can do your best work, what are
Mm-hmm.
you looking for? Like you mentioned, when you're interviewing with the other C-suite folks, what are you asking and what are you looking for? What will it mean to find the right fit?
Yeah, so I'm looking at it from a number of different angles. I'm looking at it from, okay, what is the company strategy? How are they going to win? Where are they in terms of the marketplace? How are they seeing themselves in terms of what they're targeting and going after and focusing on? So I need to understand that. How well then the layers like the product strategy, what is the opportunity there? What's that outlook? And also, how are they executing, including the tech? Is the tech execute? Can you move?
Yeah.
Can the tech move or is it stuck? And wow, you can't make any changes, really significant changes from an experience perspective for 3 years because the legacy just really won't allow it and enable that. So there's like all of these layers that I'm trying to understand and glean just to see, okay, is this a growth company or is this a like maintaining? We're just,
Mm-hmm.
what's the pace of that work? And does that fit well with how I operate the best? So those kinds of things. Some of that I can do on my own with third party research or conversations in my network, that sort of thing. Some of that I'm asking questions directly of the CMO, of the hiring CPO or whomever, all of those things. And then there's the, okay, who, it's really important to understand the people. Who are they? How do they operate? How do they communicate? What are they looking for? What does success look like from their lens? How well do they feel like they're collaborative and they're high functioning together? What does that look like? And then there's the personal stuff. Do I want to be driving into the office 5 days a week? Do I want to work in a very distributed team? Do I want what's good for me and my family and that sort of thing? So there's like different ways to break that down. And then going back to the people, sorry, the one thing I forgot to mention was just like the hiring manager. Who is my manager, right? How do they operate? Do I feel a connection to that person? Do I feel comfortable? And do I feel like there's going to be the psychological safety of being able to just have direct communication and feel like we can have sometimes some debates, maybe sometimes. I'm going to get clarity of insights and understanding and expectations so that there's not a lot of room on the table to like later on to say, oh, I expected this and you did that. No, we're not going to have that. Where can we get that alignment? So I feel like it's from those different lenses is what I try to focus on. And then I'll create the kind of questions that I have tailored for each of the interviewers based on their roles, what I feel like I could glean from them to help me assess overall the fit.
Yep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Susan. This is an unfair question for the last question. I'll preface
Uh-oh.
with that because it could be another session altogether where we could talk for hours and hours. It's been a topic on my mind though, because I've been talking with other leaders in tech, specifically women leaders in tech. And some of the conversations I've had, unlike where you've reached, there's been some women at the director level, senior director level in the product management, engineering, and UX worlds that are having trouble taking the leap to the VP level or C-suite. And there starts being some conversations about, does that have a bit to do with the fact that we're women? Is there a glass ceiling? Are there systemic barriers in place? You've hit that exact level. And I'm curious what your perspective is as a woman navigating the tech world. I assume you've had a challenge or two along the way, but any advice for these women who are sitting at the senior director level and they're really struggling to make that leap up? And oftentimes thinking it has more to do with the systems in place than them. Like, any message you'd like to share?
Yeah, I have to really think on that. Yeah. One of the things is, how do any of us recognize whether it is us versus the system, for instance, and how do we recognize whether it's us, the role of UX, or the system?
You can't
because
really break that apart.
It's hard, right? Because like, I thought about it at one point. I'm like, oh wow, not only am I female, I have a different ethnicity, and I'm in design. They're like, it's okay. In terms, how do I determine which part is
absolutely
more challenging?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, there was a conversation that I had not too long ago about a role, and they decided that it was VP. Then they decided to make it a director. And I was like, oh yeah, here are the 3 reasons why I'm not interested. You know? One of which I'm like, I'm pretty sure you have a VP of product management and a VP and VPs of engineering. So I'm trying to understand if you're saying that design is of equal weighting, this seat at the table, the whole thing, then I'm just not really understanding. It's not showing, it's not demonstrating that seems true. So that was one of them. So that's where I meant by like the design piece is hard to separate from the female piece, because like sometimes they won't hire for the same level as product management and engineering in some companies. And that might be budget reasons. It might be they don't value. It's not always about how much they value it. I get it. But that says a lot about how this role will end up showing up and the success of that role. That's what I said about that, is how successful will this person be coming in when they're a director 2 levels below their peers, who are supposed to be all of equal weighting, right? So that's where I get a little bit like, I don't know, is it women? Maybe not.
Yeah,
Is it design?
absolutely. And through that story too, you've mentioned that people are in different situations, but you're in a situation where you know your expertise and worth, and you'll say no when the organization is not aligned with that expertise. You're very careful to say you understand other folks and candidates may not be in that position, but it's really powerful to own your expertise in these situations.
Yeah. And also, I feel like that should also be a little bit of, hopefully, a slight little bit of education too. This is how it's going to be perceived. And it was 3 parts, because the other parts were some other things that I'm not sure they fully considered. And all in a positive light. The recruiter was thankful, all that stuff. By the way, they did up level it to senior director since then, but either way, to me, it's still not the same. It did cover the 3rd part, because they were creating a ceiling for one of their senior managers, like now just hiring a director. Like, if that person's high performing, now you just created a ceiling for that person. So not sure you've considered that, but something else just to think about as you go forward with this role. So anyways, but yeah, no, so hopefully that was a little bit of education as well, in a little way. But yeah, that was the kind of the intent. I could have just said, oh, sorry, this isn't for me, right? Yeah.
Thank you. I had mentioned at the beginning of the talk, Susan, we hadn't had many chances to connect, even though I had known you for so long. I so appreciate you sharing your story. I know by no means can you share all of it in an hour, but I learned so much. Thank you for your generosity and for sharing your lessons learned. I so appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I hope it was somewhat helpful.
It was very helpful and inspiring. It's inspiring to me, and also I'm sure inspiring to my audience. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad we finally got to connect in this way.
Me too. Yeah. Thank you, Susan.